This is Break Up Activity, Session 5.
In today's lecture, we will talk about stimulus equivalence. Stimulus equivalence is based on the emergence of accurate responding to untrained and non-reinforced stimulus-stimulus relations, following the reinforcement of responses to some stimulus-stimulus relations. And while stimulus equivalence is based on the emergence of accurate responding to untrained and non-reinforced stimulus-stimulus relation. Following the reinforcement of responses to some stimulus relations. And while that sounds very complicated, it's actually not. An important component of stimulus equivalence is the use of arbitrary stimulus classes. A stimulus of stimulus equivalence is the use of arbitrary stimulus classes. A stimulus class is stimuli that share similar or unsimilar. In typical stimulus classes, such as feature stimulus classes, stimuli share common physical forms, such as topographical or relational forms, such as spatial, and these are developed through stimulus generalization. However, arbitrary stimulus classes do not share a common stimulus feature. There's a limited number of stimuli, and they are developed using stimulus equivalence. Stimulus equivalence is useful for teaching complex verbal relations. It's also useful in teaching reading, language, and math. So let's talk about an example for each one of these related to stimulus equivalence. In reading, for example, you may have the spoken word cat with the written word cat and a picture of a cat. Stimulus equivalence would look at how many of those relations the student could emit when shown one of the other stimuli. In mathematics, similarly, this may occur. With the written number, the spoken number, and a number of objects. So for example, the number 5, the written word 5, and then 5 objects. You want to test for stimulus equivalence. When testing for stimulus equivalence, you must have a positive demonstration on 3 different behaviors. Behavioral tests that represent the following mathematical stimulus equivalence. You must have a positive demonstration on 3 different behavioral tests. That represent the following mathematical statement. If A equals B, and B equals C, then A equals C. One of the tests for stimulus equivalency is reflexivity. This occurs when the absence of training and reinforcement. A participant selects a stimulus that is matched to itself. So one of the tests for stimulus equivalency is reflexivity. This occurs when in the absence of training and reinforcement, a participant selects a stimulus that is matched to itself. So A equals A, match to sample. Here's an example of what a reflexivity test would look like. Start a match to sample trial. The participant will make a response called the observing response to present the sample stimulus, the conditional sample. The comparison stimuli are usually presented after removing the sample stimuli. A response that selects the matched stimuli and rejects the unmatched stimuli will produce reinforcement. The non-matched stimuli are not reinforced. The pig would be presented and then taken away, and the child would be asked to select the pig. If they correctly select the pig, they would be reinforced, and if they do not, they would not be reinforced. Most matched to sample applications use error correction to correct errors. Another test for stimulus equivalence is symmetry. It occurs with the reversibility
Gesundheit.
of the sample stimulus and the comparison stimulus. If A equals B, then B equals A. Here's an example of symmetry. Here's an example of an applications. Use error correction to correct errors. Another test for stimulus equivalence is symmetry. It occurs with the reversibility of the sample stimulus. This equivalence is symmetry. It occurs with the reversibility of the sample stimulus and the comparison stimulus. If A equals B, then B equals A. Here's an example of symmetry. Here's an example of an A-B relation stimulus equivalence test. The word pig would be presented with 3 pictures, and if the child selects the picture pig, then they would be reinforced. In this BA relation test, the pig would be presented with 3 words, and if the child correctly selects the word pig, then reflexivity has been demonstrated. Another test for stimulus equivalence is transivity. It requires demonstration of 3 untamed and untrained stimulus-stimulus sequences. So the B to C relation. Here it requires demonstration of 3 untrained stimulus-stimulus sequences. So the B to C relation. Here's an example of transivity. So you train A to B, or the written word, to the picture, and then you train B to C, or the picture to the spoken word. And then you test for A to C, which would be the written word to the spoken word. Once you have done pre-assessments to determine pre-existing stimulus equivalence, then you can provide training to help individuals develop stimulus equivalence. Stimulus equivalence represents an efficient teaching strategy because you don't have to train all of the A to B responses and all of the B to C responses Essentially, you get some of those responses for free. Stimulus equivalence has been shown to produce generalization in word reading, as well as a variety of other tasks. To recap, in today's lecture, we talked about stimulus equivalence, its definition, examples, and tests for stimulus equivalence. In today's lecture, we will talk about stimulus prompts and transference of stimulus control. First, we will define stimulus control and stimulus prompts. Then we will discuss strategies for fading stimulus prompts to natural stimuli. So first, let's talk about what transfer of stimulus control is. That is a technique used to fade both response and stimulus prompts. Prompts should be only used during acquisition. The goal of transfer of stimulus control is to transfer stimulus control from the prompt to the naturally existing stimuli quickly using fading. So stimulus prompt to the naturally existing stimuli quickly using fading. So stimulus prompts are stimuli added to an SD prior to the child emitting a response. So it is an antecedent stimuli. Stimulus prompts can consist of movement prompts, which would be pointing to or looking at the target stimulus. For example, stimulus prompts can consist of movement prompts, which would be pointing to or looking at the target stimulus. For example, when teaching a student to discriminate a penny from a dime, you might point to the correct coin when you say its name. Positional prompts would be moving the target stimulus closer to the child. So if you're asking for the dime, move it closer to discriminate a penny from a dime, you might point to the correct coin when you say its name. Positional prompts would be moving the target stimulus closer to the child. So if you're asking for the dime, move it closer to the child. Redundant is another strategy. Stimulus prompts. It is when additional dimensions, such as the color, size, or shape, of the target stimulus is exaggerated. So for example, placing the correct coin on a white sheet of paper would be a redundant strategy. Stimulus prompts are faded through errorless learning procedures, such as stimulus shaping, transposition, and stimulus fading. Let's talk about stimulus fading. In stimulus fading, you're highlighting a manual dimension, such as the color, size, or position of a stimulus to increase the likelihood of a correct response. The highlighted or exaggerated dimension is faded gradually in and out. So for example, you might fully highlight a letter A to teach handwriting, and then gradually reduce the darkness of the letter A until it is faded completely. Superimposition of stimuli is frequently used with stimulus. Superimposition of stimuli is frequently used with stimulus fading. Two specific classes of stimuli are presented to prompt a response. In one instance, the transfer stimulus control occurs when one stimulus is faded out. In another application, one stimulus is faded in as the other stimuli is faded out. The math fact, 8 plus 5. In this scenario, balls representing the numbers are gradually faded out to the math problem 8 plus 5. Another strategy is stimulus shape transformation. In this strategy, you use an initial stimulus shape that will prompt a correct response. The shape is gradually changed to form the natural. Another strategy is stimulus shape transformation. In this strategy, you use an initial stimulus shape that will prompt a correct response. The shape is gradually changed to form the natural stimulus while maintaining correct responding. For example, the picture of a car is gradually changed to the written word car. Things you want to consider when selecting a stimulus prompt is: what is the target response? Does your prompt lead to the target response? What is the natural stimuli that should control this behavior? And does my prompt lead to that stimuli, controlling the behavior? You want to order your SDs in a hierarchy from the most natural to the most artificial and select from there. You want to make sure you are decreasing the likelihood of prompt dependence while preventing errors. You may also want to consider implementing error correction procedures if the child makes a mistake. One common challenge with children with autism is that they can focus on non-relevant stimuli. For example, where an object is placed, its color, or the person doing the teaching. So you want to vary the non-critical stimuli to prevent them from focusing on these. You also want to make sure you have processes in place to correct over-selectivity. You want control to be transferred over to the critical features of the SD. There are several stimulus control strategies that have been used to prompt acquisition of tasks that can be faded quickly. These strategies have been used with people in age from preschool to adulthood. For example, McDuff, Krantz, and McClanahan use activity schedules to help individuals with disability engage in leisure activities. Script and script fading procedures have been used by Krantz and McClanahan, such as textual or audio prompts. The words were embedded in an activity schedule. Video modeling has also been used to promote acquisition of daily living and vocational tasks. Video prompting was utilized by Von Larhaven et al. 2010 to compare the use of video and picture prompts. Both would be stimulus prompts designed to promote acquisition of tasks. In this case, Von Larhaven was looking at teaching middle school students to fold laundry and to cook pasta. Video prompting has been found to increase attention to the important stimuli, and that the presentation of a task in real time helps promote acquisition. Combining stimulus prompts such as picture with text, or video with audio, or video with text has been found to promote acquisition of tasks more efficiently. You want to make sure that what you put in you're able to take out, because you do want the naturally existing stimuli to take over. So you want to have a fading plan in place whenever you implement stimulus prompts. One way that you can promote fading is to change the level of prompts from more intrusive to less intrusive. For example, changing from video prompts to photos, video prompts to audio, may allow students to fade the stimulus prompts more quickly than if you completely remove them. Another strategy that has been used is to allow individuals with disabilities to adjust the prompts themselves until they are no longer using the stimulus prompts. Mecklin et al. 2010 provided picture, video, and audio stimulus prompts and allowed participants to choose what level of prompt they wanted. Over time, participants relied less on video prompts and more on picture or picture plus audio prompts. Eventually, the students did not need the prompts at all. Recap. Today we talked about stimulus prompts and transfer of stimulus control to natural stimuli. We talked about what stimulus control and stimulus prompts were. Then we talked about strategies for fading stimulus prompts to natural stimuli.